So look, let me drop some knowledge on you. We talk about Puerto Rico, right? La Isla del Encanto. But before it was all pina coladas and Bad Bunny, it was the crown jewel of the Spanish Empire in the Caribbean. I'm talking Fort Knox with beaches. This wasn't just some little island. This was the strategic heart, the gateway to the Americas. Spain poured everything into it, building fortresses that looked like they were carved by giants. Why? Because everybody wanted a piece of it. The English, the French, the Dutch, they were all lining up like it was the hottest club in the New World, ready to crash the party and take over. And for 3 centuries, from the 1500s all the way to the 1800s, they tried. Man, did they try. This wasn't just a one-and-done deal. We're talking a relentless barrage of attacks, a constant state of here we go again. But here's the part they don't teach you in school. This wasn't just Spaniards in fancy helmets holding down the fort. No, sir. This was a united front. This was Spaniards and my people, the Boricuas, the Criollos, the locals, fighting shoulder to shoulder, spilling blood together to protect their home. They were a family, a dysfunctional colonial family maybe, but a family that knew how to throw down when invaders came knocking. They were defending their soil, their culture, their lives. This story isn't just about forts and cannons, it's about the birth of a Puerto Rican identity forged in fire and resistance. It's about a people who refused to be conquered. They stared down the most powerful empires on the planet and said, "Not today, pendejo, not today." This is the history of our resilience, our grit. Here's a breakdown of notable military confrontations and invasions they successfully resisted. Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1553. San Juan is still a baby, just getting on its feet. The paint on the first buildings is barely dry. And who comes sailing over the horizon? The French. Not for a friendly croissant and café con leche, no. These were French privateers, basically government-approved pirates, led by a dude named François Leclerc. They roll up to San Juan, which at the time was more like a small, hopeful town than a fortress. The defenses were minimal, like bringing a spatula to a sword fight. The French just waltz in, take what they want, and then, to add insult to injury, they light the whole place up. They burned the city, the whole damn thing. Can you imagine the heartbreak? The settlers, my ancestors, watching their homes, their church, everything they had built with their bare hands go up in smoke. It was a brutal, devastating blow. The French figured, job done, and sailed away, leaving behind a pile of smoldering ash and broken dreams. They probably thought, well, that's the end of that little Spanish experiment. But they underestimated the people. They underestimated that Boricua spirit, that stubborn refusal to just lie down and die. It was a hard lesson, a baptism by fire, literally. But this is where the story gets good. This is where the legend begins. Did they pack up and leave? Hell no. The Spaniards and the local settlers, the Tainos, the Africans, the first generation of Puerto Ricans, they looked at the ashes, they rolled up their sleeves, and they started over. They regrouped, they rebuilt, stronger this time. That attack was the wake-up call. It was the moment Spain realized, oh, we need to fortify this place for real. The burning of San Juan was the catalyst that led to the construction of the legendary forts like El Morro. It was a tragedy that planted the seeds of an unconquerable fortress city. Fast forward to 1595. The word is out. Spain is rich, and Puerto Rico is the key to that treasure chest. And who decides he wants that key? The one and only Sir Francis Drake. This guy was a rock star of the high seas, the Queen of England's favorite pirate. He shows up with a massive fleet, like 27 ships and 2,500 men. He's feeling confident. He's feeling cocky. He thinks he's just going to sail right into San Juan Bay, snatch the gold that was waiting there, and be home in time for tea. He had a plan, a nighttime sneak attack to get past the big, bad fortress everyone was talking about, El Morro. So under the cover of darkness, Drake sends his ships creeping into the bay. It's quiet. The tension is thick. His men are probably thinking about all the riches they're about to plunder. But the defenders of San Juan weren't sleeping. They were waiting. They had this chain boom stretched across the harbor entrance, a nasty surprise. And up in El Morro, the Spanish and Puerto Rican gunners were ready. As Drake's ships got close, the cannons of El Morro roared to life. I'm talking a symphony of destruction. Cannonballs ripped through the English ships, shattering wood, tearing sails, and causing pure chaos. Drake's flagship, the Defiance, took a direct hit. A cannonball smashed right through the captain's cabin, killing some of his top officers. Drake himself barely escaped with his life. The surprise was ruined. The English were getting torn to shreds. They tried to fight back, but they were sitting ducks for the cannons high up on the cliffs. After a few hours of getting absolutely pummeled, Drake had to swallow his pride and order a full retreat. He sailed away with his tail between his legs, defeated. El Morro had spoken, and it said, "Get the hell out of my harbor." It was a huge victory, a David versus Goliath moment that echoed across the Atlantic. So, you'd think the English would have learned their lesson after Drake got his butt handed to him, right? Wrong. Just 3 years later, in 1598, they're back. This time it's George Clifford, the Earl of Cumberland. He's another one of Queen Elizabeth's favorites, a real fancy-pants nobleman. And he learned from Drake's mistake. He's not going to try and sail right into the cannon's teeth. No, his plan is to land his troops east of the city and attack San Juan by land. It was a smart move, I'll give him that. He bypassed the main harbor defenses and caught the city off guard. And for a minute, it worked. The English forces swarmed the island, overpowered the defenders on the ground, and after a tough siege, they actually captured San Juan. The Earl of Cumberland is walking through the streets, thinking he's the new king of the castle. He's got the city, he's got the fort, he's got it all. He probably sent a letter back to the Queen like, "Mission accomplished, Puerto Rico is ours." But then, something else invaded. Something much smaller, much deadlier, and something the Earl's army had no defense against: dysentery. Or as my abuela would call it, a real bad case of the runs. The island fought back, not with cannons, but with germs. The English soldiers, not used to the tropical climate and sanitation, started dropping like flies. The bloody flux, they called it. It tore through their ranks faster than any Spanish sword. Their army was rotting from the inside out. Supplies were running low. Morale was in the toilet, literally. Clifford realized he couldn't hold a city with a sick and dying army. So, after just a few months, he had to abandon his prize. He sailed away, leaving the Spanish and Puerto Rican forces to just walk back in and reclaim their city. The island itself had rejected the invaders. All right, now it's 1625. Time for a new challenger to enter the ring. This time, it's the Dutch. And they're not messing around. A massive fleet of 17 ships under the command of Captain Boudewijn Hendricks shows up. The Dutch were a major naval power and they came with a vengeance. They landed, they fought their way into the city, and just like the English before them, they took the town of San Juan. The Spanish governor and the remaining soldiers and militia did the only thing they could. They retreated into the fortress of El Morro. They locked the gates and dared the Dutch to come and get them. So you've got this standoff. The Dutch control the city, but the Spanish and Boricuas control the impenetrable castle. Hendricks is getting frustrated. He sends a message to the governor inside El Morro: "Surrender now, or I'm burning this whole city to the ground." The governor, Juan de Haro, sends a message back that's basically the 17th century version of "go screw yourself." He says he's got plenty of wood and charcoal inside the fort to roast every last Dutchman. It's a total stalemate, so Hendricks, true to his word, orders his men to set fire to the city. La Fortaleza, the governor's palace, and hundreds of homes were torched. But even with the city burning around them, the defenders in El Morro did not give up. For over a month, they held out. The Puerto Rican militias, fighting for their homes, organized counterattacks from outside the city walls, harassing the Dutch supply lines. The Dutch were stuck. They couldn't take the castle, and they couldn't stay forever. Finally, with their own supplies dwindling and facing constant guerrilla attacks, Hendricks gave up. He packed up his ships and sailed away from the smoldering ruins. They left, but the people stayed. Once again, they had held the key. Once again, they would rebuild. So the 1700s roll in, and you know what that means? More drama with the British. It's like they had a calendar reminder. Time to go annoy Puerto Rico again. Throughout the 18th century, Spain and Britain were constantly at each other's throats in a series of messy European wars that spilled over into the Caribbean. Wars like the War of Jenkins' Ear, yes, that's a real name, look it up, and the 7 Years' War meant that Puerto Rico was always on high alert. It wasn't always a full-blown invasion attempt like before, but more like a constant simmering threat. Think of it like a Cold War, but with cannons and tropical heat. British warships would constantly patrol the waters around the island, probing the defenses, blockading ports, and occasionally getting into little scraps with Spanish ships or coastal forts. They attacked towns like Arecibo and Aguadilla, trying to disrupt trade and test the island's resolve. It was a war of attrition. Every time a British sail appeared on the horizon, the alarm bells would ring, and the militias would have to grab their muskets and get ready. It was an exhausting, nerve-wracking way to live for decades. But all this pressure had an effect the British didn't intend. It forced Spain and Puerto Rico to double down on defense. They didn't get complacent. They kept reinforcing the fortifications, not just in San Juan, but all around the island. They built more watchtowers, more coastal batteries. The local militias became more organized, more experienced, and more fiercely protective of their home. Every skirmish, every threat, just made them tougher and more determined. By the time the British launched their last major invasion in 1797, which we'll have to cover in another video, Puerto Rico was a hardened veteran fortress, ready for anything. Or so they thought. 400 years. 4 centuries of Spanish flags, Spanish governors, and Spanish rule. 400 years of fending off the French, the British, the Dutch. But everything comes to an end. The year is 1898. There's a new player in the game, a young, ambitious country called the United States of America. The Spanish-American War breaks out, supposedly over Cuba, but America had its eyes on the whole Spanish Caribbean prize, and on July 25, 1898, the US military made its move on Puerto Rico. But they didn't attack San Juan. They learned the lessons of history. They didn't go for the head, for the heavily fortified capital. No, General Nelson A. Miles landed his troops way on the other side of the island, in the sleepy southern port of Guanica. It was a brilliant strategic move. The resistance there was minimal. From Guanica, the American forces began to advance across the island, meeting some Spanish and Puerto Rican resistance along the way. But the outcome was never really in doubt. The once mighty Spanish Empire was old, tired, and broke. It couldn't properly support its colony. The fighting lasted only a few weeks. The US had superior firepower, fresh troops, and a clear plan. Spain, exhausted from the war in Cuba and facing an impossible fight, had no choice but to surrender. In December 1898, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and Spain officially handed over Puerto Rico, its last and most loyal colony in the Americas, to the United States. Just like that, over 400 years of history, of shared struggle and identity, came to an end. The Spanish flag came down, and the stars and stripes went up over El Morro. A new chapter, a new colonial relationship had begun. So, what's the takeaway from all this? It's that the defense of Puerto Rico was never just a Spanish affair. For centuries, it was the Puerto Rican militias, the ordinary men, farmers, artisans, merchants, who stood on those walls and fought in those fields. They were the island's true immune system, and they had leaders who rose from their own ranks, patriots like Ramon Power y Geralt, who not only fought but went to Spain to demand more rights and recognition for his people. These weren't just colonial subjects. They were defenders of their homeland, forging a unique Boricua identity in the heat of battle. Their courage is a vital part of our story. They faced down the greatest empires of their time and won. In total, at least 4 major foreign invasions were repelled before the US succeeded in 1898. Puerto Rico, under Spain, was considered La Llave del Caribe, the key to the Caribbean. It wasn't just a nickname, it was a fact proven with blood and cannon fire. The island was a fortress, a symbol of Hispanic resilience in the Americas. And that strength, that spirit of resistance, didn't just disappear in 1898. It lives on in the people today, in our art, our music, our passion, and our endless fight for our island's future. This history is our inheritance. It's complex, it's messy, but it's ours. And we have to know it, we have to tell it, because if we don't, who will? Thanks for sticking with me on this journey. Support our channel, subscribe, like, and share. See you soon.